Next we have Dr. Natascha Wesch going to speak to us. She is, if you can unmute yourself, doctor from Canada. She's, I think, a lifelong athlete. I don't actually know her personally, but we have a few mutual friends and they all speak very highly of her. So I asked her to join us at the conference here. And I'll make sure that she can share her screen. There you are. Okay. Excellent. Thank you, doctor. Can we, I haven't heard you yet. You're not muted,
I'm
are you?
here. Can you
there we
hear
go.
me?
Okay.
Yep.
Good. And yeah, brief intro. I don't have, brief intro and then cut it loose. After your presentation, we're gonna have a small break before we pick up again the top of the following hour. But beyond that, it's all you. We'll leave some time for a couple of questions I'm sure people will have. And thanks for being here.
Yeah, my pleasure. Just a quick intro. My background, lifelong athlete. My background, I played all kinds of different sports growing up. Unfortunately, did not do a whole lot of track and field, and certainly not throwing a whole lot of anything apart from throwing a few bodies around. I played rugby internationally, and then so represented Canada for over 10 years on the rugby international scene, and then coached representing Rugby Canada. So I coached our junior national women's teams and then our senior women's sevens team. Retired in 2009 after leading the team to the Dubai World Cup. Also a hockey player, varsity hockey player. And now I'm involved in triathlons. Rugby players and hockey players don't swim very well. Not that I've conquered that, but that's my thing right now. And so that's my athletic background. From an academic background, I did all kinds of different things and finally found my way to sports psychology and mental performance. I teach at the University of Western Ontario in London, Ontario. And I also have my own private practice in mental performance consulting and counseling. So that's a really brief intro, quick. And what I wanted to do today is talk to you a little bit about the mindset, and specifically, as you can see from my slide, I'm going to talk about doing a mindset reboot and kind of how do we reach peak performance in the new normal, whatever this new normal is going to be. What do we need to think about and what do we need to do? Obviously, given the time frame that I have, I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail, but what I hope to leave you with is some information about what you can do, some tips, some ideas that not only as coaches, but as athletes that you can think about. And of course, there'll be some time for questions at the end. So if you do have questions, please hold on to them and I'll come back to them at the end. I think that'll just be for the interest of time. So first thing, just this disclaimer, today's session, just want to make sure this is educational only. And this is not any kind of therapeutic session on any part. It's going to be really important that you take the information here and then alter it for your specific circumstance. I encourage you to, whether you're a coach or whether you're an athlete, if you have questions about this and want to get more detail, to seek support from your own mental performance consultant or therapist or something like that. Again, take notes, apply to your own personal sport context, and ask some questions for clarification at the end. Although this information is being shared with you guys, I am going to share it. Kidway, I'm going to send it your way after as well to share with the participants. But please, this is for your own personal use. This is just something that I've been asked to do now because there's so many Zoom meetings and so on. This is really just for your own personal use, and that it is intellectual property. So just a really quick disclaimer there. Okay, so let's actually get on to things. So I talk about this, 10, maybe now 11 weeks of isolation, and what does that mean? And for all of our athletes, if we're coaches, for you as athletes, we've been on various levels of isolation. Different people in different countries, different provinces, different states have different isolation and restrictions that they've been put on. But one of the things that's super important to recognize is that we all have been affected by this in some way. And this is unique because I know you've heard about this through many different people have said the same thing, but this is probably one of the first times in the history of our planet, of our species, where the entire planet has been affected at the exact same time. And the important thing to recognize as coaches and as athletes, when we talk about stressors, you know, we're used to putting our bodies under stress with training, and we're used to putting our bodies under stress with even emotional and psychological stress of training and competition. But we've been inundated with all kinds of different stressors that we're probably not used to, and we're maybe not even recognizing that they are indeed stressors. And the thing that's important is stress, and the mind and the body don't differentiate between the different sources of stress. So in other words, I can get psychological stress, I can have physical stress. It all goes into the same, what I call the same stress bucket, right? And so it's super important to acknowledge and to recognize, not only as an athlete, but as a coach, that we've been under high levels of stress over the past 10 weeks. And everybody's had their own individual levels. And it's important to recognize that. So it's been accumulating, and it has been stressful. Even though we haven't been able to train the way we've wanted to, we haven't been able to compete evidently, we haven't been able to do the things that what we used to be able to do in our old normal. Stress has been there. And I put a few bullet points there in terms of the types of stress that maybe, you know, you're not even recognizing that you're feeling. Or your athletes are feeling. And I put the planet's energy, this collective stress. And, you know, from a chemical perspective, from a biochemical and a chemistry perspective, just so you know, I did do a master's in biochemistry before going on to doing sports psych. But, you know, we're all a collective, and we all feed off of each other's energy. We all respond by each other's vibrations, if you want to call it that. And we can feel the stress of other people. We can feel the stress of the planet, and it's permeating the air, and it has been permeating the air for the past 10 plus weeks. And so we have to recognize that we absorb that kind of stress, and we have to recognize that we need to be able to manage that kind of stress. Of course, we've had the physical stress, but very different physical stress than we're probably used to. Lack of movement, or very different movement. For example, you know, I usually, in my normal day-to-day, if I'm teaching at the university, first thing I do in the morning is, you know, get up and go for a walk, and then I'm off on my bike and I bike to the university. So that's a half an hour bike ride where I get my exercise, I get my movement, and yes, I'll do all these other things. But the difference now is over the past 10 weeks, I get up and pretty much sit in my pajamas. At least I've started to do things differently, but sit in my pajamas for the first, you know, couple of weeks and just plop myself in front of the computer. I miss my walk. I miss my bike ride. If I'm going to my office, I would bike as well, but I miss that. So there's a lot of things that were changing, even though I was still getting my runs in, still getting my workouts somewhat in. My movements were very different. And even though we think, well, that's not stress, the lack of movement, when we're used to moving as athletes, that's a stress. And a stress is anything that's new, that's being thrown upon us, either psychologically or physically, that we're not used to doing. So that's a huge, huge impact that it can have on our stress levels. And again, mind and body don't differentiate. Of course, there's a psychological stress that everybody is feeling at their own level, whether it's financial, family, work, the stress of the unknown. When are things going to open up? How are things going to open up? What is the new normal going to look like? And then, of course, the abrupt change in plans. And these are things that we have to absolutely acknowledge that we're facing. And then the final bullet point there that I put is the emotional stress. And this is huge. You know, the lack of connection, of human interaction that we need as human beings, that plays a significant role, not only on our stress levels, but our overall well-being, the feel-good chemicals that get released when we see each other face to face, when we feel the energy of the other person. We need that stuff, and we've been missing that on a level that's never been experienced before. So the reason I put this is that we have to acknowledge that these are things that have impacted us, that have impacted your athletes. And everybody's been facing it in their own way. So I want you to kind of keep that in the back of your mind as we go through this, as I go through this presentation with you guys. Okay, so I put a picture up there of Sarah Mitten because it's the only one that I knew that actually would fit in this, because I don't know any other throwers. So Sarah, thank you. She didn't know I was going to put this picture of her up here. So I put this slide up because I talked about the stress bucket, and that's what that photo down in the left-hand corner is. For me, that's my kind of visual representation of the stress bucket. And you know, on every day-to-day stuff in our usual normal, we do have stressors, but we're more used to them. We accumulate the ability to manage those stresses because we get used to them. We acclimatize, we adapt. And so the faucet, if you will, is dripping, but it's dripping pretty slowly. But what's happened over the past 10 weeks and what's going to happen and continues to happen as things reopen, as restrictions get lifted and the lockdown kind of lifts a little bit, we're still going to have new stresses. We're still going to have things that we're going to have to adapt to. That'll be the first time. So the tap isn't just dripping right now. It is full on, and the bucket is filling really quickly. So we have to be able to recognize that we're going to need to manage some of those stressors, and we're going to need to do things differently, and we're going to have to ease into things, not so much because we don't have the capacity to handle the training so much. It's that we have to ease back in because we're going to be facing a lot of stress and our bucket may overflow. So the thing to recognize as well is, as I said, we've had varying degrees of lockdown. Everybody's been very different in their own reality of what their lockdown has looked like. Some people have been able to train in very different ways than other people. Some people have had access to things where others have not had access to things. So there's a lot of anxiety that's around this for the athlete and of course for the coaches, but focusing on the athlete right now, there's going to be a lot of anxiety around this. Like, what happens when things open up? What am I going to be able to do? And you know, even from in my own household, I have, you know, my own daughter who's an athlete, freaking out when we heard that things were going to reopen. It's like, but I'm not ready. Like, I haven't been able to do stuff. What am I going to do? And so I think it's super important for athletes and for coaches to reaffirm to the athletes, like, trust the work that you've already done. When, you know, the world kind of went on pause or stop or lockdown in mid-March, you know, the work that you'd been doing up until that point, that's very important to consider, that you've been doing a lot of work. You didn't get to that point just by chance. Your journey up until that point was not an accident. It was planned, and the training is there. It's just been put on hold for a little bit. And yes, maybe it's come down a little bit, but the thing to keep in mind, and why I put those 3 bars on the bottom right-hand corner, is we have different levels of things that we've been doing. Our athletes, and you as an athlete, has been training. It's just been different. But hopefully what many of you have been doing, and if you haven't, there's still time, is to try to find some of the gaps of things that you maybe didn't have time to do before because you were so focused on competition, so focused on things that you needed to do, but there were things that you wanted to do that you didn't get a chance to do. So hopefully you've been focusing on doing some of those things. And so that means that you've actually been building up some of those different layers, some of those different bar graphs. Like, those bars have been going up in areas that maybe you needed to bring them up that you weren't able to do so before. An example being, you know, again, I'm going to relate it back to me. I like to give examples that kind of hopefully give you an understanding of what I mean. So I haven't been able to train the exact way that I wanted to. I mentioned to you, I've been doing triathlons prior to all this. And of course, swimming, nobody's swimming. There are very few people are swimming. And we've just been able to get back out into lakes recently. But what I was able to do, I was able to really focus on, you know, doing much more mindfulness than I've ever done before this lockdown, being able to do much more yoga than I've ever done, catching up on my sleep. I'm a night hawk and I can work till all hours of the night, but I've been able to catch up on sleep. And all of these things may seem really minute. They may seem really inconsequential, but in fact, they are very, very important. And those are some bars that I've been raising that are going to have a significant impact when all of this stuff, when this lockdown starts to be released, when things start to be able to open up again, which they are starting to do. My body has been rested. My body is much more flexible. My body is much more recovered and regenerated than it had been before. I may not be at the same strength level. I may not be at the same endurance level than I was, but I'm certainly much fitter in other areas. And so that's important for you to trust that work that you've done, not only before the lockdown, but during the lockdown, right? That can play a really big role. So, you know, this slide is because at least where I am in Ontario, in Canada, things have been pretty shut down for, you know, a good 2 months, 3 months almost. And over the past couple of weeks, things have slowly starting to be lifted. Restrictions have been lifted. And then all of a sudden it was like, okay, we're starting to adapt to our work, and we're starting to adapt to this lockdown, and we're starting to adapt to, you know, homeschooling and online schooling, and trying to train on our own. And then all of a sudden, you know, the provinces and the country says, okay, go, you can start doing stuff. And that meant training a little bit in small groups, or training for individual sports, and there were all kinds of different reactions. And the initial reactions, there are different ones that can happen, but they tend to fall in 3 kind of categories, right? It's this panic and anxiety where, oh my God, yay, this is exciting, but I'm not ready. Like, I haven't done the work. And kind of going back to the slide that I had before, is you've got to trust the work, right? You really got to trust the stuff that you've been doing. And we're going to go through this in a progressive state. We're progressively returning to sport. We're not just going to open up shop. At least most parts of the world are not just opening up shop and releasing all restrictions. So yes, it's okay to have that panic and anxiety. It's okay to have sort of that, holy moly, what's going to happen? I'm not ready. Other people may have the relief of the response of relief, whereas thank God, I am so tired of being under this lockdown. I'm so tired of being in this state. And then other people may have confusion, like, okay, yeah, but how am I going to return? Like, what is that going to look like? When, why, like what's going on? And all of these reactions are super normal. And I think it's important as coaches to recognize that your athletes are going to have these reactions, and that they are normal. And why are they normal? Because there is no normal in this. Like, this is new. All reactions are normal. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can assist the athletes, and how you as an athlete can really assist yourself in recognizing that these are normal things, and that we're going to go through this in a stage. And, you know, they're calling it phases of reopening, at least in our area, in Canada, there are different phases of reopening. And so it's important that you recognize it's kind of like starting training again. And that's why I put this little picture of this little dude. It's like learning to ride your bike again, right? Even though maybe you don't ride your bike in the winter, when you pull out your bike, if you've done the training, you know how to ride your bike. But you might have to think about some new things. So the psychology of returning to training, it is going to be a vastly different experience. And it's going to be for everyone. And part of it is we don't even know what half of this stuff is going to look like, or maybe more than half. We don't know what it's going to look like. We don't know exactly what the terms and conditions are going to be, right? We just got, for example, our squash club that I belong to just sent out this whole information email about what it's going to look like, what we can expect. And, you know, we're going to have to place our personal belongings in a bucket that's separate for somebody else's bucket. And it's going to be, you know, 2 meters apart, 6 feet apart. And, you know, you can only hit by yourself in the court for the beginning. And then later it's going to be, you can hit in the court, but only with somebody from your own household. And like, it's just going to be weird. And you go in one door and you have to go in out the other door of the squash club, and you can't stay and shower, and you can't stay and socialize. And there's going to be all these weird things. So it's going to be important to recognize that in addition to the how are we going to get back to things, that we have to recognize there's going to be a psychological component to this that's going to accompany the changes. And it's also going to be added to the accumulated effects of the previous isolation period. So we have to keep that in mind, that it's not just, okay, back to training, and expect you, the athlete, or expect the athletes, if you're a coach, to just kind of hop back into things and get back into the swing of things. There's going to be some stuff that you're going to have to deal with. And so you have to anticipate the various ranges of reaction and embrace flexibility. Be sure that you're flexible and adaptable as a coach, but also as an athlete, that it's okay if you feel weird and off. And it's okay that, you know, this feels kind of awkward and frustrated, or that you might feel frustrated. So take all of these different experiences into account as you plan and get back into the reintegration process. So your response to go, you might have a different response. And I put this open water swim here just to give you another example. You know, we started, like I mentioned, and I'm not putting track and field examples here because I have none that I can really super relate to. So this is your work to do the relating piece back to your own sport. But, you know, this week only, we started back in the water, and it was, you know, 3 people in the water together with our coach, and it's open water. We're not in the pool, we're in a lake, and we have to stay far apart from one another. And my initial reaction was really like, okay, like I'm actually scared because I haven't swam in 3 months. Like I haven't even done any swimming motions in 3 months. Like and my competitive mindset is like, okay, I'm going to get back in the water and everything's going to be great and everything's going to be awesome. But I had to really check myself emotionally and psychologically and go, wait a second, like, what am I going to expect here? What should I expect from my return to training? Should I expect myself to be back to normal? Should I expect myself to go back full out and be able to do every movement naturally and normally? And like I said, I had to check in and go, no, I have to put different expectations on my first swim back. I don't know what it's going to feel like. I'm probably going to feel out of shape. I'm probably going to feel like I can't move. It's probably going to feel awkward. And rightly so. I got into the water and put my wetsuit on, and I couldn't breathe, and I could barely swim 100 strokes without gasping for air. And it was just super uncomfortable. But had I not prepared myself psychologically for the possibility of that, I would have been really frustrated, really angry, really upset at myself. My competitive mindset would have been like, I would have beaten myself up going, you're never going to get back to where you were. This is awful. You can't believe you didn't swim during lockdown. You could have swam in your bathtub. I don't know. I could have come up with all kinds of things, but I prepared myself psychologically to go, this is not going to be the same. This is not going to be what I thought it was going to be. And it's probably going to be even very different. And because of that, I was like, okay, yeah, this doesn't feel so hot. It doesn't feel so good, but I knew that I wasn't going to feel great. So I'm just going to let myself ease into it. I'm going to let myself kind of just adapt and be thankful that I'm actually in the water, in a lake, doing something that I love to do. So I really focused on the gratitude piece of things. And it sounds kind of frou-frou to focus on the gratitude, but boy, does it make a difference when we talk about psychological well-being. And you know what happened is we went back on Wednesday, 2 days later, and it felt like just the one day of practice and getting back into the water on Wednesday, a whole different ballgame, like a whole different experience. I could swim, like the 100 strokes I wasn't gasping for air, and I could do 200, and I could do like half the lake without stopping. And I felt like this is awesome. And I knew that it wasn't going to be perfect, but then we went out again this morning, and this morning felt even better. So I think the important thing is you have to be able to recognize that you're going to catch up. Your body knows. You've done the training and you've done other things that will help you get back to, if not further than where you were before. So going to the slide, there's Dr. Howitt from the Canadian Sport Institutes proposed a psychological framework that's really important for coaches and athletes to understand as we go through this, as we get back into this training. So yes, as I said, there's going to be a range of reactions that exist. Different responses are going to require different support systems, right? You may need to step back. You may need to go, wow, what is this like training with other people again? Or what is this like training with a mask, potentially? Who knows, right? Like, what is this going to be like? And it's possible to cycle through the different emotions, that you don't just go, yay, this is awesome, and then that's it. You might go, yay, this is awesome. Oh my God, I'm so nervous. Oh my God, I'm anxious. I'm frustrated. And cycle all through those, right? So it's important that you have those necessary supports in place. And what I mean by that is make sure that you have somebody that your athletes can talk to, whether that's an MPC, a mental performance consultant, whether that's a trusted coach or a member of the staff. Make sure that people have somebody to talk to, and openly talk about that. And I'll give you some practical tools and recommendations here. So the first one is this mindset, there's 3 different mindsets. This mindset of, let's get back out there. This is exciting. This is awesome. Like, we're going to come back to training. No issues, no problems. I'm going to get back at it. So it's important that where some people are going to be like this, for sure, it's important to manage these individuals' expectations regarding the new normal, because it's not going to be the same. And it's important to be clear on risk mitigation procedures. Like, what must they do? What mask must they wear? Do they have to sanitize before? What do they need to do? And what is the distance? And all these things, it's going to be different across different states, different provinces, different countries, but you have to prepare the athletes for that. And you as an athlete need to be prepared so that you get into that training zone or that training environment and you're not overwhelmed with this additional stress that's going to impact your training, right? So be cognizant of your personal training load during lockdown, what you were able to do, what you were not able to do, but also what's going to be expected as you get out there. So that's the first kind of mindset that you might encounter. The second one is one that's of fear and anxiety. You know, some people may be very fearful and anxious of contamination or a second wave or of performance outcomes, lack of performance outcomes, right? Very anxious about getting back out there and what will happen and what will that look like. And so it's important to recognize that that is a normal response. And as a coach, you're going to need to explore the individual comfort levels. And for you as an athlete, kind of recognize where you are and recognize that it's okay. So start to focus on the controllables, the things that you can do to mitigate any of those fears or anxieties that you have. So how are you going to help yourself protect yourself if you have that fear? And as coaches and as fellow athletes, we need to be respectful of those, of everybody's response, because everybody is allowed to have the response that they have, right? And so it's to respond and to recognize individual responses without judgment, and to create this psychologically safe environment for everybody to train. That if somebody wants to wear a mask, they should be able to wear a mask. If somebody needs to be training a little bit earlier or later because that helps them psychologically, then we'll need to make some adaptations as we go along, not just the physical adaptations, but the psychological adaptations. And it's also the third bullet point there. It's also normal to be concerned with our performance outcomes, right? We are athletes. We are high performance athletes, high performance coaches. Your focus, like your benchmark, is outcomes. And so it's normal to be concerned with that. But I think you're going to have to not curb the expectations, just recognize that you're going to have to look at things a little bit differently, at least when we start to build back up again. Remember that little guy on the bike that I put the photo of before? We're going to have to learn how to ride the bike again. And there might be things that are new. And it's not just learning how to ride the bike on the pavement. It might be learning how to ride the bike on gravel roads. It's going to be very different, right? So acknowledge that and allow the time for adaptation there. Okay, the third one, the third kind of reaction that people might have are everybody's been personally impacted by this. And there's some people that have been impacted to a greater level than others. But I think it's important to remember that everybody has their own reality. And even though the way that I've been impacted by COVID-19 and what that's done to my family or my work or my environment has a certain level of impact, it doesn't negate my reaction if somebody else had a greater impact, say, or maybe they lost a loved one, or maybe they've completely lost their job, or everybody's got their own reality. So we don't want to compare. This is not a comparison time where, oh, well, you didn't lose a loved one or you did. Everybody's got their own reality. And we got to remember that people are going to have those responses, and that stress bucket that we talked about at the beginning, some people are going to have greater levels of stress. And it's not, like I said, a comparison. It's just an acknowledgement, and to recognize that some people will have to have different accommodations to get back into things. So we need to be sensitive to personal circumstances and provide options for supports and for gradual reintegration. You may have, a team of 5 different athletes, and all 5 of them will have to be reintegrated at different times, potentially based on their reactions and based on their experiences. Okay, so keep that in mind, and keep that in mind for yourself as well as an athlete. So I've got 4 recommendations for you, and that I think are really important. And these have been shared, and they're not just my recommendations. I've taken these from some of the research that's been put out there. important, as I mentioned earlier, that as the restrictions are lifted across the globe and as things get lifted in different time frames, anxiety is going to rise when the focus on the potential competitive advantage kicks in. In other words, some people are like, yeah, but you guys have been able to train for this many weeks and we haven't even started training together, and you've been doing things that I haven't been able to do, and you have access to this. And let's remember that we've got to make sure that we focus back in on the things that we can control, which is point number 2, but to recognize that, yes, there is anxiety about this, and it's okay to have that anxiety. That anxiety is a normal response, right? Anxiety is basically an emotion that kicks in when we worry about future outcomes or future events. Well, that's a huge worry right now. We're all worried about future outcomes and future events. So it's normal that anxiety is kicking in. And the way to manage some of that anxiety is to focus on the controllables and the potential opportunities. So maybe you're still under lockdown. And like I said, maybe there's an opportunity for you to focus on flexibility or to focus on areas of your training that maybe you don't usually have time to focus on. Maybe it's much more technical, or maybe it's, you know, strength that you haven't had time to do before, or maybe it's mental skills. Maybe it's imagery, maybe whatever it is, but it's to look at potential opportunities given the circumstance, rather than looking at all the things that you can't control, the things that you don't have, the things that you can't do. So identify gains that can be made under the current training circumstances. And you might have to think outside the box. You might have to be super creative. And I don't think, actually, it's not that you might, you'll probably will have to be super creative in your training and in the way that you reintroduce things with your athletes if you're a coach. And like I said, opportunities to develop things that otherwise may not have been the focus. Number 3 is new protocols are going to be required to return to group training, and everybody is going to need to adapt. So one of the things that's going to be important for you as a coach and you as an athlete as well is to clearly outline the procedures and the requirements for re-entering into the training environment and entering into the training environment. Do you need to wear a mask? And so again, so that the athletes, when they show up, there's not an added stress. You're taking away some of the unknowns, and that removes a little bit of the stressors, right? It's just like anything else. When you're preparing for a big competition, you maybe go to that competitive site or that competition site beforehand, so you get a feel of things. Maybe you go to a competition in that area before, so you get a feel of things. Well, it's the same thing now. Give advance notice of what it will look like, as much as you know, and also acknowledge the things that you don't know, so that the athletes feel a little bit more comfortable, and that they know, at least as much as possible, what to expect when they show up at training. And as an athlete, try to get that information for yourself. If that's not being provided to you by your coaches, try to get that information for yourself, all right? So help conceptualize and understand what modifications will need to be made, and then make the adaptations accordingly, right? And then the 4th point in the recommendations is to consider having a team meeting to present this information if you are a coach, or organize that as an athlete. And maybe, again, follow up with individual meetings as required. And I put with a mental performance coach if you have one, or a trusted staff member, so that athletes feel comfortable. And even your coaching staff, don't forget about the coaches, because the coaches are humans too, that everybody has access to talk to someone about how they're responding to all this stuff. Right? Because we think as athletes, there's this athlete mindset that we have to be tough and strong and not let anything bother us. But you know what? Yes, it's good to be tough and strong. But in order to be tough and strong, we have to build that resiliency. And building resiliency is to be able to stress ourselves, talk about it, rebound, recover, and then stress some more. Okay? And I'm just aware of the time here, so I want to make sure that I get through things quickly. So I've got a couple more slides. So another tip and a recommendation for you, and this is more from a mental performance perspective. And as athletes, create a plan and your scripts. And what I mean by that is know what your mind does. Like, are you someone that tends to focus solely on outcomes? Are you someone that tends to maybe compare yourself to other people? Are you someone that really doesn't want to make mistakes or look bad in front of other people? Are you someone that's worried about, you know, maybe injuries or you know, not being good enough? Know where your mind goes with stuff, and then plan ahead for what you want to get out of each of those training sessions as you work yourself back into training. And maybe out of those early competitions, you know, if there's a competition in August, say, August typically may be the middle of your training season, or middle of your, or the early part of your competitive season after having a big block of training. Well, August this year is not going to be the same as August any other year. So it's super important that you recognize, okay, well, what do I want to get out of this August competition? Maybe it's about just being back in competition mode. What is it going to be like? Maybe it's about starting back my mental training plan and really making sure that I have a plan in place. And it's not so much about, say, throwing far, or it's not so much about the outcome of things, but it's going to be maybe just on technique and what I want to get out of it, because it's going to take some time to get back into things. And I think if you put the expectations of be back exactly where you were when you left off, that's going to create some huge stressors that, as I said at the beginning, the mind and the body don't differentiate between stress. Stress is stress. And so you overload psychologically, the body is going to feel it, and maybe you won't be able to throw as far as you could be, right? So work your way back from a competition and look what's needed to be optimally prepared. That may be psychological trainings and psychological skills. It may be technical. It could be different things. And that's where your expertise comes in your own sport. But begin planning now. And when I say write your scripts, write out how you're going to respond and how you want to respond to the competition. What do you want to focus on? And really have clear-cut goals, not just, okay, I want to focus on distance. I want to focus on, I want to focus on just being calm in the circle. I want to focus on showing up on time, having all my stuff organized. It seems like basic stuff, but we've been out of the competition scene for a while. So we need to reboot our mindset here. So we have to start back from the beginning, right? Once you write out your plan and you write out your scripts, imagine yourself in those scenarios ahead of time. Most of you at this level will have visualization or very good imagery skills. And I encourage you to use those, right? Plan how you're going to overcome your most likely mindset obstacles. So when you go into that competitive mode, when you want to throw far and then you're like, whoa, 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 okay, hold on. I planned that I was probably going to do this. What I want to focus on is this, and I'm going to have to remind myself. So plan those things. And then finally, be realistic with your timelines, right? You're not going to be right back at where you were when you left off. All right, I believe this is my last slide. Lessons learned and still learning. So I call this the COVID Twilight Zone because it's been like the Twilight Zone. What has the COVID Twilight Zone taught you? And you'll see the picture or the diagram there on the right-hand side. It's called a brain dump. I like calling things a brain dump. Like, what do you put in? And the example here is more of just life stuff, but you can make it specific to your training and to your sport. So what has COVID taught you about your training environment? Like, maybe some of you recognize that, maybe you've been isolated from your coaches, obviously, and you haven't had the feedback that you normally get. So maybe as an athlete, you recognize that you're much more self-sufficient than you gave yourself credit for before. And maybe you are much better at self-evaluation and analysis that you were before. And you've had to focus on these things. And maybe as a coach, you're really good at communication and you never really noticed that. Maybe that's taught you that about your training environment or what training has done. And maybe, what do you want to carry through? What are some things that you learned during the COVID Twilight Zone that you want to bring forward into the next piece? Maybe you do want to bring more mindfulness. Maybe you want to bring more yoga, as an example. Your support system. Who do you need, right? I've had a lot of athletes comment like, wow, I really recognize why it's so important for me to go to my chiropractor every 2 to 3 weeks. Or I recognize the importance of my massages, but I also recognize that I'm also self-sufficient and I can do things that when I feel injured or when I feel off, I can do things on my own much more than I gave myself credit for before. So these are things that I may want to take into my next, my next phase of this and moving forward. And the importance of human connection, the importance of having that discussion with your athlete after a throw or after a training session and really connecting with them. That's going to be important, right? Or maybe you recognize how important that is because yes, we have this human connection sort of through video and these Zoom chats, but let me tell you, there's a very different feeling, because as I said before, we're connected through chemicals, and we're connected through, you know, atoms and all these different, this chemistry that we have human to human. And, you know, eye contact is very important. And what we feel and what we feed off one another is very important. And maybe you recognize that that's something that you're really going to want to bring back into your training when we're allowed, of course, when we're allowed to touch again, when we're allowed to be together again. But I'm certainly not going to take hugs for granted anymore. And the next time that somebody says, you know, yay, we're allowed to hug again, wow, I'm not a hugger, but I'm going to give somebody a hug, that's for sure. So what do you want to focus on moving forward? And how do you want to approach sport, training, competition, and kind of thinking of all the things I've talked about today? I would encourage you to do a brain dump, take a journal, brain dump, right? Write all this stuff down. And so that, don't assume that you're going to remember all this stuff, because I had stuff that I was doing in the first 2 weeks of this lockdown that I already forgot about. And I need to reconnect with some of that stuff because it's important. Whew, so there you go. On time, only a minute late. So what now? So I encourage you to kind of think about, what do you do now? It's kind of the extension of the last slide, but maybe what are some bright ideas that you have from this? What are you going to take from this? What is an aha moment or a eureka moment that you took from this? And I don't expect the world to change from one presentation, but hopefully you've got some stuff here that you can start to use with your athletes from a psychological perspective, and you as an athlete that you can start to consider. So I'm going to leave it at that, and I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to open it up for questions, if there are any questions at all.
Thank you, Natascha. That was really informative and fantastic. We have one already from Agna. Are there any daily practices that you would recommend for athletes to help with the current situation and also as psychological strengthening over long term?
Yeah. You know, I don't know if many of you encourage your athletes to do mindfulness training. And I don't mean, maybe there's different ways of doing mindfulness training or mindfulness meditation. And I don't necessarily mean like sitting like, you know, the whole thing. But mindfulness meditation, that's one of the things that I started doing during this lockdown period. And I did a mindfulness and / yoga challenge for 30 days. But what mindfulness meditation does is it allows you to be able to train your mind to focus back in on the present moment and let go of all the stuff that's happening that you can't control or that you may not need to do right now. And the connection from mindfulness to sport is very, very clear, but most people don't make that connection. So for example, for you as throwers, you know, being able to not block out, but just let go of all the other stuff, maybe the last throw, what your competitors did, the crowd, maybe no crowds now, but whatever, the crowd, being able to let go of that and just come back in and focus in on what you need to do, that is a skill, and that is a mindset skill. And what mindfulness does is it allows you to be able to just sit. And it's not about not thinking, but it's just about focusing in on one thing. Maybe your breath, that anchor as your breath. It may be a body sensation. It may be a sound. But it's the ability to get your mind to focus on the thing that you want it to focus on and not to get connected or grab on to all those other thoughts that are going. So that was a super long answer, but to give you insight into mindfulness training. And there are so many apps out there, like a bazillion apps that you don't even have to pay for. Like, just download all the apps and go through all the free ones that you get. So that would be my recommendation for sure.
Thank you. That's really good. So essentially, like under the umbrella of mindfulness, you could say like the simplest of things, like making your bed could be an act of mindfulness.
Absolutely.
Right.
Like, you know, brushing your teeth, and rather than brushing your teeth, and I've done this before, you brush your teeth and you're so angry, like I didn't get this done today. And you're like, okay, chill. Just, what does it actually feel like to brush my teeth? And it sounds so like simple, but you'll notice that your mind quickly wanders off to, okay, what do I have to do tomorrow? And then you start brushing again. And you're like, okay, hold on. So every time that you come back to just being mindful and present on the thing that you're doing right now, think of that as a mental rep in the gym, right? I was thinking about I caught myself and I came back to the right now. One mental rep. You do that 1,000 times, that's 1,000 mental reps. You're going to get stronger mentally.
Excellent. From Sergey, he says, thank you. This was very interesting. Do you think in this individual adaptation period, should we show the athletes different motivation points? Maybe bring something else to the table, playing atmosphere, you said.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is a great time to do things that you don't usually have time to do, right? So if, simulation training, things that you may never have the opportunity to do because you're so focused on getting just the critical stuff done, because that's the only time you have, what a great opportunity to, again, it could be psychological skills, but it could be simulation training. It could be, I'll give you another example, like when you're in an international competition, and in my sport, and I think it may be the same in your sport, but in rugby, as a head coach, the head coach is actually not allowed on the field, on the sidelines with the athletes. But in everyday rugby, we're allowed to be on the sideline with the athletes. And then all of a sudden we get to international competitions and we're not even allowed to be anywhere near them. And then they're like, I don't know what to do. I don't know. But we try to train that kind of stuff when we have the opportunity. But there's so many other things to train that we forget about that stuff. And then when we get to competition, that's actually a pretty big barrier. So yeah, absolutely. Trying to train different things right now. Hopefully that's what you meant.
Yeah, I think so. And also to make that similarity for sure, like in track and field, especially in throwing, we are generally fairly close to our athletes. And then you get to a major and you're in a stadium. And some of these stadiums are like, the European or soccer stadiums when there's like that big gap between the field. So you're even more spread apart, right? So like sometimes you can't even talk really to your athlete.
Right.
And that's a good thing, I think, for people to work on, that especially athletes graduating from college, they don't really know that or kind of understand, because generally they're fairly close. Nick, is mindfulness training something I could work on with my athletes as a group at practice, or should they be encouraged to do it on their own?
Yes, it's a quick short answer. Yes, you can work on it in practice with them. Absolutely. And it could be something as simple as, you can work on this is a great activity to work on in warm up. So, and I don't know what kind of warm up you guys do, forgive my ignorance here, but let's say the athletes are going around for a little jog or something. Like they'll go around, and usually what they'll do is they'll go around and they'll chat about all kinds of different things. And they're really not focused on their warm up, right? Like they're just jogging, or they're doing some dynamic warm up exercises. And it's something that they do so often that they don't even think about it. But getting them to focus in and go, what does it actually feel like to warm up? Are you feeling your body warming up? Are you feeling your heart rate increasing? And just feeling the sensations of the body, that's mindfulness. And what does it feel like? Like, what does your body feel like today when you're stretching, when you're warming up? That's mindfulness. And for a lot of them, that's a hard thing to do. And to train that can then transfer to all other aspects of your sport, for sure.
And Tracy says Zach Brandon, who's Zach's tomorrow. He'll be diving into mindfulness stuff.
Perfect.
So that'll be pretty good. I think it's like a lot of things. Sometimes people just get hung up on the word, right? They hear yoga, or they hear mindfulness, or they hear this and that, and then it's like an automatic no, and that's not really the point.
No, absolutely. And I think there's so much research. I'm glad that somebody will be focusing specifically on this tomorrow, but there's so much research on this and on athletes. And there's some of the best athletes in the world, will not openly tell you that they do mindfulness or meditation. But that's probably a secret weapon, I mean, as far back as, in the 1990s, like Phil Jackson was coaching his athletes to do meditation and mindfulness, and people thought, "Ooh, he's frou-frou." But if Michael Jordan can do mindfulness, pretty sure we can all do mindfulness.
Yeah, absolutely right. So to be mindful of your time, if anyone else has questions, let's see your fingers moving. But otherwise, we can say bye. Thank you. This was really great, honestly.
I'm glad. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and good luck to everybody in all of this strangeness.
Yeah, absolutely. You as well. All right, everybody. So it is, what time is it? It's 2:20 my time. We will take our last scheduled break of the day, pick up at 3 o'clock my time, which is in 40 minutes, with Ryan Whiting. He will be speaking about rotational shot put, his philosophies on the event. Come with some questions, actually. This, I might be able to frame this better than maybe I have with some other presentations. He'll talk for a good bit, and then, but absolutely, he's looking for something pretty engaging, interactive. So if we have some questions for him, let's write those down and be ready for him at the top of the hour. Until then, I will see you guys shortly. Thanks for being with us.